Welcome to the first episode of Free Range Politics. I'm Yuripzy Morgan.
And I'm Torrey Snow.
And on this week's episode, we are going to talk about the war in Iran. Are we actually winding things up or not? We're also going to get into some comments by former presidential candidate Andrew Yang and how you actually can't tax the rich. There are serious consequences. And then finally, we're going to get into this idea of whether or not the left are they just willfully blind or are they compassionate? We're going to talk about all that and more, but let's get started with the war in Iran.
Yeah, look, I'm really getting conflicting messages from the Trump administration on this. You know, when you think about the conflict, Donald Trump says we're winding things down, but then we're deploying more troops to the Middle East. 3,500 Marines that are headed over there. There's more ships that are moving into the area. So which is it? Are we winding the war down or not?
Yeah, this goes back to my central argument. We all agree Iran is a terrible actor. They deserve a lot of the consequences the regime does for the way that they have brutalized their own people, the tens of thousands of their own citizens that they have brutally murdered in the streets of Iran. That is not the question here. The question is, what are we doing there as America? Like, what is our goal and when is our stopping point, right? So the AP is reporting now that the goal has been to get rid of uranium. Uranium is, of course, the central element that they need to continue their nuclear weapon proliferation, right? That's the thing. Get rid of uranium. And there are now reports saying that, okay, if you want to get rid of uranium, their uranium stocks, that takes actual physical boots on the ground, right? It's like if I come to you as an engineer and I'm like, Torrey, I want to build this thing. And the first thing you're going to ask me is, what's your budget? What's your timeline? That's going to take resources. And that's what the Trump administration has not presented to the American people. And now because it seems to get more and more complicated, and now they are floating the idea of troops on the ground, I think that we should be asking these questions.
Yeah, I do. And let me give you a little bit of background on what's going on with the troops, because I know that there are some people saying that there is a deployment and there's not. So news outlets have been reporting that very high-ranking officials who are speaking anonymously have identified that they are making plans to deploy additional troops. They are making plans to move more ships into the region. They're very, very concerned about the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil supply runs through there, and there's questions about NATO's involvement, things like that. And so they're saying, do we need troops in the area? The Pentagon has justified this as they're basically saying, well, they're not going to Iran, but we want to be prepared in case something else happens. So, Yuripzy, that's the foundation of what they're doing. Donald Trump, just a day ago, was saying, we've destroyed everything. There's nothing left. They don't have any more batteries. They don't have anything left there. We're winding things down. And he put this on Truth Social as well, that, they're pretty much planning to wind things down. So again, conflicting messages. We're putting troops over there, but we're also winding down the operation because we've already obliterated everything.
Yeah, and listen, I get the argument. Like, we were there when the Art of the Deal was written. Like, Donald Trump is not new to us, to our generation. He's been around since Home Alone,
Right.
Like, he's been the same guy. I understand that a lot of times he asks for the moon and he kind of walks it back, but that's not how. It makes it very difficult for foreign policy and for national economic policy, right? So, for example, petroleum got to $112 a barrel yesterday. If that doesn't mean anything to you, I was up at 8 o'clock this morning coming to the studio and, almost said my first curse word before breakfast because I put gas in my car. And it was the first time that I looked, I was like, it's in the 50s. It's like, excuse me. It hasn't been in the 50s. I don't remember the last time it was in the 50s. Maybe not ever since I had this car about a year and a half ago. And so I was like, I'm shocked. And it is, I think, having a significant effect on Americans now. Republicans are good luck in the midterms. But to get back to what you were saying, like whether or not we are actually going to, or are we winding things up or not? Because again, if we're talking about uranium, the reports are that there are about 1,000 or so. I'm looking at the report here, about 1,000 pounds of enriched uranium that they could use to rebuild their nuclear weapon system. But it's buried under all this rubble. So when I say like literally you may need boots on the ground, you may need construction equipment to lift those tons of heavy, brick and concrete that we've destroyed to then remove the uranium and secure it so that Iran doesn't have the capability anymore. And that all of a sudden, that's not what we were talking about in February when it was going to be in and out. We're going to destroy their capabilities and then we're going to leave. That's like, this is a whole different story.
And look, the issue is that there's confusion. Nobody knows what to believe right now. And that's really my main concern. I mean, he stated that his objective was to eliminate their military capabilities. I didn't hear anything about going in and removing uranium. I didn't hear anything, certainly nothing about putting troops on the ground. So again, if we're going to deploy troops into the region, if we're going to go there, if we need to go in and, do equipment moving and setting up bases and things like that, that's fine, I suppose, but tell us what the plan is. That's my frustration with this, Yuripzy, is that we simply don't know what they're after. He was at the gaggle, out in front of his helicopter saying, we destroyed everything. So if we destroyed everything, then what's the purpose of moving more resources into the area?
More resources and more money, because that's the other thing too. There have been, poll after poll has shown that the majority of the American public tends to trust Republicans more when it comes to economics, right? When it comes to social policies, they tend to trust Democrats more. When it comes to money, they tend to trust Republicans more until it comes to a war. Because then all of a sudden, it's like the credit card is limitless. The reports are that since last Sunday, so almost a week ago today, Torrey, we'd spent $12 billion already in this war. And we're spending, on average, about $1 billion a day. So for a party that has been known for fiscal conservatism, how are you gonna explain that to the American people?
Republicans love spending money on war, and that's. I mean, honestly, you could campaign on that. I mean, national defense.
Democrats have.
National defense has always been a Republican thing, so it doesn't surprise me one bit that you have a supplemental funding bill that the White House is basically asking Congress for an additional $200 billion in order to continue funding this. Like that's a lot of money. Is that going to have political consequences? I don't think that most Americans think about the expenditures when it comes to defense. They should, but I don't think that they're, historically anyway, we haven't been particularly sensitive outside of, people care when troops die. Yeah. They care when we are losing and when bad things happen, but I can't remember the last time there was a big public outcry over how much money we're spending on defense. We've expanded the Pentagon's budget almost every single budget, and that's something that even the Democrats vote for.
Yeah, and to your point too, I think it's also the fact that President Trump's foreign policy has just been sporadic at this point. I mean, one minute we are in Venezuela. We're taking, who I will say was not a duly elected president. But still, we went to Venezuela and we snatched him up. And then we're beefing with Canada, who I thought they're okay.
Cool.
So now
I don't know, actually.
We're, but we have a relationship, okay? And now we're beefing with Canada. Right. And then we're going to either buy or take Greenland. I guess it's up to them. And now Cuba?
Yeah. I just can't keep up. What is his foreign policy? Like, look, and I suppose another aspect of this discussion that maybe, I'd be interested to get you all's feedback on. Do you trust Donald Trump's judgment when it comes to foreign policy? I think that's really the question that we're asking right now. Do you trust his judgment? Just a couple of days ago, we had the Prime Minister of Japan visiting us. Just listen to this.
We should tell U.S. allies in Europe and Asia, like Japan, about the war before attacking Iran. So we are very confused about we Japanese citizens.
Well, one thing you don't want to signal too much. When we go in, we went in very hard, and we didn't tell anybody about it because we wanted surprise. Who knows better about surprise than Japan? Okay? Why didn't you tell me about Pearl Harbor? Okay?
What is happening right now?
What an odd question, too, by the way. Why didn't you tell us about Pearl Harbor? I think that was the point.
Yeah,
that they didn't
it was a surprise attack. Look, and by the way, Donald Trump is getting mixed reviews on this. Some people are saying he's hilarious. And I will be honest, when he said that, I kind of cringed, but I was like, it's kind of funny, I suppose. Yeah. But at the same time, he's talking to the head of state of another nation, Yuripzy. Yeah. He is talking to these heads of state. And so can you trust an administration that doesn't seem to follow basic rules of decorum to be able to conduct broad military actions? Can you trust that if we're going to be deploying these resources in Iran, that it is going to stay? And that's, again, I'm going to come back to this point. Do I have confidence that we have a sound strategy that I, as an American citizen, can have an opinion on? Because that's the other part of this, is they feel like we don't need to know, well, we're not going to tell you anything. I do want to know because, I need to make decisions about whether I'm going to ask my congressman to oppose the war or not.
I'm not asking to be in the war room. Like, I get that there are some decisions that, that are on a need to know basis. I'm not asking for everything, but give me a reason why we're there, when we are going to stop. Like, what is our goal? That should not be a very difficult thing. And to go back to the Prime Minister of Japan, like, that's the thing with Donald Trump. Like, is it entertaining? Yeah. But so is reality TV. That doesn't mean that that's what I want my real life to look like, right? And so with Donald Trump, like, yes, what he says sometimes it is entertaining, and it's some of the shock value. Like, I would never. Can you imagine?
Yes.
Even like when W would say things, we called them gaffes, right?
What does it say? Watch the shot.
But see, that's the thing about W though. It was very unintentional. Like but you could tell that when he needed to put on a suit and tie and be presidential.
Yes.
I mean, he may not be able to open a door, but he at least was. You could take him places, right? With Donald Trump, sometimes it's like, these things have consequences, right?
Do they though? I think that's the real question. Do they have consequences?
Do we want to find out?
Well, he's talking to the Prime Minister of Japan. She gave that man a hug on the way out. Now, again, heads of states, they shake hands before they leave.
Yeah.
They say thank you for the visit. She gave him a hug.
She did.
Are other people feeling a little bit relaxed about this? That's what I'm wondering. Donald Trump's authenticity has long been one of his values. A lot of people have said, well, I just like that he's a real guy.
Yeah.
Who, again,
or maybe
people
they just don't
make
take him
jokes.
seriously, Torrey.
Well, that's part, but it's also Japan. So again, they lean heavily on us economically. And that's the other part of this is the Prime Minister of Japan, if she was offended, would she say something about it? Because again, Donald Trump, being as reckless as he is, could be like, fine, 1,000% tariff on all Japanese goods. That's the kind of situation that we're in. So I don't know.
The Supreme Court won't let him anymore.
Yes.
Okay, so let's switch topics real quick because I want to talk to you. You actually brought this up to me. I know Andrew Yang, you're a total fanboy for Andrew Yang.
He should be president.
And listen, I find him super interesting because he says he's a Democrat, right? Is that right?
Yeah, he ran as a Democrat.
Yeah, but see, I'm glad you said that he ran as a Democrat because a lot of times he says things that I'm like, this is more evidence of how parties have just completely gone off the deep end because half the time he says things and I'm like, I totally agree with you, including this thing. So he was recently on a podcast and he was talking about how taxing the rich doesn't work.
Correct.
So can we play that first clip?
By the way, when I ran, and even I think like last month or whatever, I think wealth taxes are a disaster because wealth is portable.
Yeah, you saw what happened in California is wild. All the people that left.
And so I joke with people, it's like, guys, you cannot think that rich people are rancid assholes, but that they'll stick around if you decide to like tax it. It's like those two things don't exist in conjunction.
But that goes back to my point that it's popular, that people, the 90% of the.
Yeah.
I mean, I find that so fascinating. So first of all, he's talking about a wealth tax. So to be clear, that you've got like an income tax, that's on a tax on how much money you made as an income, right? Your property tax, the value of your property. Wealth tax means how much money you have. So like the value of your property, not what you sold, not what you made, not what you earned, but just the value of your property. And we're going to tax you on that. So you've got X amount of investments. We're going to tax you on that, even if you haven't sold them and made any actual money.
Right. And again, this is a core element of progressive ideology, right? Progressives fundamentally believe that wealth is evil. And people that hoard wealth are evil. They, there was another great clip that you showed me about someone being interviewed about, hey, we're going to raise taxes on these wealthy millionaires. And then to Andrew Yang's point, they're portable. And so when people move out of the state, there was an interesting student that had a fascinating response to that.
Yeah, so we'll get to that in just a second because I think you're so right. Like I think it is incredible to me how the left just kind of bypasses a lot. Like, they just kind of ignore a lot of this.
Right.
But with the Andrew Yang thing, especially like California, they mentioned California in that clip. A lot of people have left California. It's not just California, it's Maryland as well. So according to IRS data in November of 2025, Florida is the top state for net migration gains. So that means people coming into. So listen to this stat. Florida adds a new taxpayer every 2 minutes and 9 seconds. A new taxpayer comes to Florida. Texas and North Carolina, they follow with a new resident every 2 minutes and 53 seconds, and 6 minutes and 21 seconds, respectively. Guess how many people leave California? California, they have the highest net loss of taxpayers. One leaves every 1 minute and 44 seconds.
Okay.
Goodbye. Like, every minute and a half, a taxpayer leaves California. And that is because they make it impossible. Like, how can you live there when, like what Andrew Yang is saying, you're basically calling them dirtbags?
Well, it's not impossible in the sense that, like, can they afford to stay? Yes. If you are wealthy and you want to keep that money, you go where your money is working for you. I've been reading this book called it's the Rich Dad Poor Dad. Have you read it? And one of the core aspects of Rich Dad Poor Dad is, when you really want wealth, you need money that's going to work for you. You don't work for money; money works for you. People that have wealth, Yuripzy, they let their money work for them. The problem is in these high tax areas, California, Maryland, the money can't work as hard, right? It's got a minimum wage job. If it goes to Florida, it's getting a good living wage. We'll use that example. And so again, that's the whole point of wealth being portable. But your progressives will be like, well, yeah, they can afford to stay there, and they can stay, they should just be staying here out of the kindness of their heart. When you are dealing with people that have millions of dollars, even hundreds of thousands of dollars, they want to be in climates where that money is not heavily regulated, it is not heavily taxed, and it is making the maximum amount of investment that they're putting into it.
And the investment isn't just to themselves, too, because I want you to hear the other half of this Andrew Yang interview. If we can play that other half, where he explains why this is actually beneficial, I think, to society in general. Take a listen to this.
It's one reason why I loved what Michael Dell and Ray Dalio and his wife did with, like, the Trump accounts, where it's like super wealthy people. If you take the government out as a middleman, will they give billions of dollars to poor kids? Apparently, yeah. Like, they're more interested in that than giving it to the government, who they think is going to end up, like, wasting a certain percent of it, and like, yeah, exactly. It's like, if I can just give it straight to the kids and I know it's getting to the kids, I am down.
Yeah.
No, I agree. And I think that, again, most people don't mind giving money, right? Especially if it's going to go to a good cause. I mean, me as a taxpayer, we're home educators, Yuripzy, and we always joke that we make a $20,000 to $30,000 contribution to the school system. I don't inherently mind, as long as people are getting educated. It's when that money is being wasted, when it's being sucked up by bureaucrats, when it is being eaten up into fake programs, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes, and getting soaked into daycares and things like that. That's when it becomes a problem. It's a matter of trust. And I think that as a society, the more we do to incentivize people to do productive and helpful things with their money, the better off, rather than just taking the government coming in and forcibly taking it away.
Yeah, and fake daycares, mind you. That's where it really becomes an issue. And to make that point, so what Andrew Yang, I've heard this from a lot of people on the far left, right? And I want to make a distinction. It's not Democrats. We're talking about, like, the progressive, who says, no, we've got to tax the bejesus out of everybody, and then the government will take that money, and then they will spread it out, and it'll be great, except they forget that the government first siphons off a good chunk of that. I mean, the amount of money that is wasted in the government that doesn't make it to the individual. And what he was saying there, the Dell family took billions of dollars of their own money, and they said, we're going to give it directly to kids to expand those Trump accounts, right? So for kids. And there's been this fear, I think, among progressives that, no, the rich people won't actually do that. If you don't take their money, they won't actually give money, which is crazy to me, because anybody who has ever dealt with everything from a nonprofit to a kid's soccer team, right? Who sponsors their soccer team. It's not Anne Arundel County, that sponsors the back of these, little league baseball teams. It's, Bob's car dealership or, Susie's florist. That's who does this. And they don't seem to get that. For example, like in Maryland, we talk about how difficult things are. In Maryland, we are the epicenter, I think, we're like a mini California. Sometimes we're ahead of California with crazy ideas.
It's a race. It's literally a race to the bottom.
Yes. And we sometimes, like, by George, we are so fast on it sometimes. But just for an example, like I just told you the stats about everybody going to Florida and going to Texas. Did you know that in 1 year, in 2023 to 2024, we lost over 18,000 residents to other states. We are also ranked 45th nationally in domestic migration. And the growth that we have received in Maryland, because, our politicians like to say, no,
Maryland is growing.
Yeah, we got 53,100 new residents, international arrivals. Now, I'm not saying that that's bad. That's not an issue about immigration. What I'm telling you is that a lot of the people are placed here, right?
Right.
Some of them didn't have an option. They got put into Maryland. And a lot of it has to do, with our technology and Johns Hopkins and schools like that. But the reality is that people who have a choice choose not to live here.
Well, and again, Andrew Yang said it really, really well. Wealth is portable. This actually comes even closer home to Maryland. I don't know if you remember, Yuripzy, there was an IT sales tax that was implemented, and this was supposed to save everything. This was supposed to be the be all end all. Yeah. Do you all want to know what the revenue projections were when this was just a couple weeks ago? They did revenue projections. They projected the revenue from the IT sales tax to be around $150 million. Their anticipated revenue when they first signed this into law was $500 million, Yuripzy.
Yeah. Well,
sort of. And it's going to be even worse because they're coming to grips with the fact that if you're going to implement a tax on something as delicate as IT, do you know what a lot of those companies did? Some of the delegates in the General Assembly?
Democrat delegates.
They moved to Virginia.
Yeah.
They moved to Virginia. They moved their businesses. If you can escape a 3% tax on anything, it doesn't make good business sense for you to stay in those environments. I don't understand why our politicians don't get it. I really don't.
And like you said, Virginia. They moved to Virginia. They didn't move across the country. They didn't have to go to the moon. They didn't need a passport. They literally moved to Virginia. Here's another example of that: energy costs. Like that's one thing that Marylanders, we have been, raked over the coals because of the rising cost of energy. And there's a lot of blame about BGE. And I am not a BGE spokesperson. I'm not here to stand up for them. But I will tell you that a lot of the rate hikes have been due to Maryland progressive policies that said we are going to shut down 7 coal-fired power plants in the span of about, 7 or 8 years. So that reduces our energy supply. And now we have to get our energy from the grid, PJM, and it comes at a higher cost. It's like all of a sudden we say, Torrey, I'm not going to cook. I'm telling my family I'm not going to cook at home. 40% of the time we're going to eat out. You don't think the credit card bill is going to get higher? Of course it is. So take a listen to this. This comes from poweroutage.com. The cost of energy kilowatt, all right? In Maryland, the kilowatt price is 19.29 cents.
Okay.
In Pennsylvania, our neighbor to the north, 17.78 cents. In Virginia, 15.26. We are the most expensive. Our average, based on those numbers, the average energy bill a month is $174 in Maryland, where it would be $159 in Virginia. That's just a small example. And by the way, nobody's bill is that low. But that you can see how that number is so much higher in Maryland than it is everywhere else. Why? Why do you think that is?
Well, obviously, the reckless climate policies.
Yes.
Again, going back to the core point, when you don't understand economics, when you don't understand the fundamentals of how money works, and I think that's the core issue.
Yeah.
People do not understand how money works in an economy. When you crank up, it's supply and demand. If you limit the supply, then the demand rises, the price rises. That's why Maryland, which has restricted supply, has higher energy. I don't feel like I explained this
Taking
stuff to like
crazy pills.
6th graders, right? I need to get a chalkboard and just
I must
write
not
up
tell
supply
lies.
and demand.
Well, speaking of educating, so you referenced this earlier. There is a kind of a man on the street type thing, and I want to show you this clip. So we know New York has a new mayor, Zoran Mondami, and a lot of his policies are very progressive. They're super progressive, and one of his things was that they were going to tax the wealthy to pay for a lot of things, including free grocery stores and rent, locking in the rent and things like that. And so I think it's Nate Friedman. He does this kind of man on the street thing where he goes and talks to people about these policies. And I want you to hear this clip that he was talking to somebody on the street about what to do if businesses decide that they don't want to adhere to these policies. Take a listen to this clip real quick.
What do you say to these folks who say, well, if you tax millionaires, they're going to leave the city, and the top 1% pays 40% of the taxes in the city, so what happens if they leave? What's your response?
Well, that's what I would say. It's like we should take their business, and we run it like for the city ourselves.
So if they take their business to Florida, you feel like you can keep it here?
I mean, they can't leave the building. They can't just bring their whole entire workforce to Florida, right? They can't bring all of the resources that they have to build the business here to Florida, right?
Are we talking wrongful detention? You can't
That's
leave the
literally
building.
illegal, right?
Yes, there are laws against that. You cannot do that. But I thought that was so fascinating because here's this guy on the street, and this is the mentality with a lot of progressives, is that we will just tax them, Torrey. We're just going to tax them, and we're not going to allow them to leave. Okay, because when was the last time that you saw a 15-foot wall around New York City? Is there a wall that I'm not aware of? Are we gonna? Because Germany tried that and it was really bad. What does he mean? They're not gonna leave.
Look, and I think that there is this sense that businesses exist for the purpose of making society better. And this, by the way, is a fundamental philosophical difference, even politically. When someone is in business, they create an independent venture and they make money from that venture. Amazon, for example, They create a product that everybody wants. Well, when they get that revenue, is Amazon's job then to become the new torchbearer of social rights and building a better society? Philosophically, I believe that someone that starts a business, if you want to start a business to make money, your goal should be to make as much money as you can. I believe that fundamentally.
Yeah.
What you do with that money, I hope that you'll be philanthropic. I hope that you will make decisions that will help society. But at the end of the day, it's your money. You do with what you want with it.
Yeah. And listen, this is Free Range Politics with Yuripzy Morgan and Torrey Snow. And the bottom line is this. A lot of these far left policies are impractical. They do not make sense. So I want you to hear the last half of this little interview, Torrey. Oh,
No.
It gets even better. Even better. Listen to this.
That's a whole thing. And that's where you would even say, if we're building a real movement, right, to stop that, we'd also make it illegal for them to actually leave, right? We would fine them to hell if they're going to try to abandon their property here, right? Because clearly people do need to work, right? People do need to make a living.
So that's Charles Berry, and while that might have been one of the craziest things I've ever heard in hundreds of street interviews, what matters more is that he's a teacher for New York public schools. Imagine that garbage being spewed in your kid's class.
I had to have you hear that. I'm sorry to ruin your day, but because I know a lot of people were thinking like you know what, we just need to let's put some chalk to the chalkboard and let's talk about economics and supply and demand. This guy is a teacher in a New York City public school system. He educates young people, and his idea is, well, we're not going to let them leave. We're going to tax the rich. And then if they try to leave, we're not going to let them leave. And if they try to leave, then we are going to tax them to hell, is what he is saying. We're going to tax the bejesus out of them. Okay, so you're just going to take their property. I'm already, as an attorney, I'm thinking about, call me. I would love to defend you. I'm not barred in New York, but I will get barred in New York just so I can go into a courtroom and defend them against this guy. This is absolute bonkers.
And the problem is a lot of folks would say, well, he has no influence. That's just a nobody. That's literally Mamdani. Literally the mayor of New York City.
He got elected on these types of ideas. But I do think that it is very frustrating to me, because my kids are now 9 and 11, so we're a little bit past some of these stages. But everybody has to teach their kids. You don't take things that don't belong to you.
Correct.
Sir, man, on the street, you don't take things that don't belong to you. You are not inherently like these things. These are not your things. You cannot just take them.
Yeah.
They don't have any
I
obligation.
think they do feel like look, even here in Maryland,
Entitled.
we have legislators that feel entitled to people's labor. They feel entitled to the work simply because you're wealthy, simply because you have come up with a product that people enjoy, or you have something that is selling very well that doesn't belong to you. Who? Barack Obama. Remember? You didn't build that? Remember? That was
No, what was
yes.
it?
Oh man, this was years ago. He was talking about all this stuff, and he would say, "You didn't build that," and it was a whole thing. This was actually back. This is at the core of the progressive mindset. You didn't build that. If you didn't have a society, if you didn't have roads, if you didn't have all of these things, then you wouldn't be where you are. So therefore, you owe a debt to society because you are successful. I reject it outright. It's bad for society. There's people literally fleeing nations that have adopted that mindset, and they're considering it a human rights violation to not be able to come into our nation, which is based on this core philosophy that you are entitled to the wealth that you earn.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that it is such a bogus mentality. And again, this is a New York City educator. This guy is a teacher in New York City public schools, and his whole idea is that you can tax the wealthy if they don't want to be taxed and they want to leave. You can either just keep them there or find them incredibly, find them.
In his defense, though, he's a Marxist. Like that's literally
the guy on the street?
Yeah, the guy on the street. He's a Marxist, and that's. I mean, I don't know if you've ever done research into Marxism, but it's literally their philosophy. It's their core philosophy is that you own the means of production and the labor. It's a big aspect of many of the big public sector unions and even the private sector unions. And so unfortunately, it is a movement that is gaining momentum. New York City is warning us about this. If you are smart, stay far, far away. Look, if you don't want someone to send a special ops team to come in and kidnap your president in the middle of the night, you might want to stay far away from this because that's what Venezuela did.
Exactly. And we saw how that turned out. This is Yuripzy Morgan and Torrey Snow on Free Range Politics. And Torrey, I want you to introduce this next topic because you have been telling me about this story, and it goes along with this theme that we have right now. Is the left compassionate, or are they willfully blind? Tell me about Travis King.
So Tristan King. Yeah, Tristan. So this is a very tragic story. I'm going to have to give you the rundown. You can get more details at the Baltimore Banner. But basically, he's 8 years old at the time, went missing for several months. And he was living with his grandmother. She had a stroke. He got actually removed from Baltimore City schools, was basically living with a family member that had a drug issue. She reached out to the Maryland Department of Human Services. They couldn't help her for a variety of reasons. There's all sorts of excuses as to why that was the case. But at some point, their house burned down. A teacher, the school psychologist, actually reached out to the Maryland Department of Human Services and says, "Hey, I haven't seen Tristan in a while. Is he okay?" Never got a response. Again, completely missing. Finally, sometime in September, Department of Human Services, Child Protective Services got involved. They managed to find him, started transporting him somewhere. The kid jumps out of the car and basically falls off the grid for 6 months. It is absolutely wild. And what's crazy about it is that while he was missing, both the State Department of Human Services and the Baltimore City Police Department were getting tips almost regularly. They said they had over 24 tips. Their response was, even if we find this kid, we can't do anything about it. It's wild, because of the laws and the way that the policies are set. If a police officer saw him across the street, you would think that a responsible, caring adult would be like, "Get over here. If he runs, I'm chasing you and getting you, and you're going to get where you need to go." But no,
him up.
Let's just let him live on the streets. So he finally was found. Do you know the U.S. Marshals, who are not bound by the laws of the Baltimore City Police Department, were able to go in, get him into custody, get him into a hospital where he's getting the care that he needs. But again, the whole situation is just tragic. And again, I kept coming back to this idea. Is it really compassionate to let a child like that just roam the streets for several months? Is that really caring if you just leave them to their own devices with no one to actually care for them?
No, of course not. And that's what's so frustrating. per usual, the feds have to come in and act like the adults in the room. It is, when you were telling me about this story, all I could think about, all I could picture, so I have a 9-year-old who is also in the 3rd grade, just like this child, Tristan King. And what you're talking about is the policies that actually prevent them from physically restraining children. The little boy would have had to come willingly to the social workers or to the police. Now, okay, this 9-year-old who jumped out of the vehicle, right? You think he's going to come willingly? And these are the things that are so frustrating to me about some of these policies on the far left. And keep in mind that especially in Annapolis, you have a lot of, it's not just Democrats, you have a lot of far left progressives. We're not talking about rational, thinking, critical thinking people who happen to be left of center. That's not what we're talking about. We are talking about far left radical progressives who are looking at these situations, believing that they're being compassionate. And really, I think that they are being willfully blind to the realities. Like a 9-year-old should never be out on the streets for 6 months.
Yeah. And
a 9-year-old.
And that's what's crazy is that this is not an uncommon situation, right? We've had issues with the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services, but again, Vincent Schiraldi, the former secretary for the Department of Juvenile Services, said the worst thing that you can do is incarcerate a young person. Well, again, tell that to the morticians that are constantly having to, identify 12, 13, 14-year-old children who, because of gunshots or violence or drugged, I didn't even tell you about the fact that this young man was literally being given marijuana to help calm down.
9 years old.
An adult giving a 9-year-old child marijuana. That's not compassion. To me, compassion would say, let's identify what an appropriate way to live is and use our status as adults to say, we don't really care what you want. I don't care how you're feeling right now. You're going to go to school. You're going to stay in this house. It is, again, the flagship component of radical progressivism is they never think about the consequences of their pie in the sky ideology.
No, and at his core, I also think, Torrey, that a lot of these progressive policies are more worried about how the adults feel than the consequences it's going to have on the children. Because I learned very early on, so for those of you who don't know, Torrey, your kids are a little bit older than mine. So my kids are younger, and there have been a lot of times where, I may go to you and I'm like, oh, this is happening. And you're like, oh, yes, I remember. I remember that, And I say that because I did not realize until I had children how difficult it is to actually discipline them. Do you remember when our parents were like, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you? And I'm like, I'm pretty sure my bottom says otherwise. But now as an adult, I'm like, no, I do get it. Because although I say no a lot, although I get onto my kids a lot, and my kids will probably say something different, like, oh, mom loves yelling at us. I do not.
Right.
It is very difficult as a parent who loves your child to yell at them, to get onto them, to tell them no all the time. There are some days that I just want to throw up my hands, Torrey, and be like, let's just do it. Let's go out to eat. Who cares if you stay up? I'm so tired of saying no to you all the time. It is hard to do. And I think that a lot of these policies are created by people who are wanting to make themselves feel good.
Yes.
I don't want to tell the kids no. Like Vincent Schiraldi. I don't want to lock the kids up. I don't care what you want, Vincent Schiraldi. I care what is best for a 9-year-old who thinks it's okay to jump out of a car and live on the streets for 6 months.
Yuripzy, is it okay if I'm a little transparent with the audience for just a moment?
Let's do it.
All right. So
Be real.
building this podcast, Yuripzy and I have been friends for a very long time. We have both discovered, and you correct me if I'm wrong, we have both discovered that in order for this to work, we have to be willing to hurt each other's feelings sometimes.
All the time. Yes.
Yeah, we do. We have to be willing to do that.
Yeah.
But it would be easier to just say, I'm just going to let it go. I'm just going to forget. In order to make progress on many things, in order to advance, you have to be willing to do things that are uncomfortable. And our hope, right, we're working together to create a high quality. It has required Yuripzy and I having late night discussions, rather tense sometimes, but we get through it. And on the other side of it, you get a better product. I think that progressive politicians need to start thinking that way.
Yeah.
Just because something doesn't feel good, just because you're worried about a police officer, having to be a little rough with a, child. Now, again, we're not talking about police brutality, right?
No.
And again, let's think reasonably here. We're not talking about, beating kids up. But, there might be a time in this particular situation, I would hope that if a police car saw a roaming 8-year-old roaming on the street that no one's caring for, I would hope that the police would say it's actually pretty better for you right now if we put you in handcuffs and get you somewhere where you can get
Like
help.
if I have to snatch you
Yes.
and put you in the car, like I am not going to sit here from across the street as the police. Because remember, like your point, he was 8 years old when he escaped custody. 8 years old, an 8-year-old child. And you mean to tell me that if the police officer saw him across the street and the kid took off running, the officer can't go after him? Or I expect you to snatch that child and put him in the back of your car, not wait for the kid to come willingly. That's insane.
Yeah, and there are just so many examples of just policies that are just counterproductive, and that's what frustrates me. I'm a naturally compassionate person, right? And that's something I have to constantly deal with. But I also think that part of being compassionate is being willing to make hard and difficult decisions sometimes.
Yeah, and the left the far left just does not want to do that. And I think that is so frustrating. And we've seen the consequences of that. Now, this kid has been wandering the streets for 6 months. Do you think that was the consequence that they intended?
Yeah, and what are the consequences? What happened to him while he was out there? Now, again, we're grateful that he's safe. And the governor, everyone's, we're glad that he's safe. But again, what damage was done in the process and how many other people are being ignored by these services? So again, I think the moral of this, right, the point that I'm trying to make is that just because there is a policy that exists that makes you feel good about yourself, it doesn't mean that it's good. And there are examples, we don't have the time to get into it, but there are just so many countless examples. Cesar Chavez, right, and some of the issues with that, like, let's just ignore the fact that he was a monster. Let's just ignore these things. And because we're focused on the bigger issue, sometimes you got to lock in and focus on those things.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we'll post some of these things on our social media, on our Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, especially some of the stories that we weren't able to get into. Like you were just saying, the Washington Post did a great article on Cesar Chavez, who is the leader of the United Farm Workers Union, and how stories are coming out now that apparently this hero of the left of the union was actually sexually assaulting, molesting, raping young women. And now those stories have come out, and the story kind of details, is the left just willfully ignorant to some of these things because it's all for the cause, right? The cause of the union, the cause of the farm workers union.
Talk about the mayor and the stuff going on with Monsi.
Yes.
Like just example after example of people being willing to overlook just unspeakable things in favor of just, making themselves feel good.
And to be fair, this happens on the left and the right, to be where there is, it's all for the greater good. It's all for the greater good. By any means necessary, we are going to get this done. And that kind of mentality, that kind of thinking is what here at Free Range Politics, I don't care who you are, you're going to get called out on it because it is important for us to have these discussions and to realize that sometimes it's not all for the greater good. These things do have to be called out, and especially when you have an 8 to 9-year-old spending 6 months out on the streets doing God knows what, and our own policies by our own progressive leaders are what are prohibiting adults from putting that kid into a safe place. Something has to change.
Well, look, there are many, many things that we can get into. We're out of time, unfortunately. But if you're only watching the podcast or listening to the podcast, you're only getting half of the experience. Look, I want to encourage all of you to follow us on Facebook, on X, on Instagram, TikTok. Both Yuripzy and myself, we're constantly updating you on current events. Obviously, we want everyone to like and subscribe to this video right here on YouTube. Tell your friends about Free Range Politics because we're just getting started. I mean, there's so many topics. I think, how many stories did we have today on our list? I think it was like 30 stories, things that we had to sort through. Half the time is deciding what to talk about. So make sure you're following us on all of those platforms, and we're looking forward to talking with you next week.
All right.